Just saw that it's gone live.
Hi, Latika.
So, should we start?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the fireside chat on product specific rule of thumbs for better financial decisions. Before we start the session, I would like to highlight for Q&A, please type the questions in the Q&A section for panelists to see it directly. Before I hand it over to Supriya, who is the moderator for today's session, I would like to introduce her. Supriya is a partner and heads research at 3iCo. She is an academic industry translator. On the side of industry and practice, she is enabling the creation of knowledge, tools, and resources to aid founders' skill building and decision making. As an academic, she publishes her research in leading journals and advises PhD students. She also teaches courses in entrepreneurship and organizational behavior. Supriya is a fellow of the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and an alumni of the International Visitor Leadership Program, USA. Thank you, Supriya, for joining us as a moderator today.
Thanks.
Handing over to you.
Thank you so much. Um, Welcome everyone to this fireside chat. And although I must say, with these rising temperatures, we should rename this as lakeside chats. We can't afford any more fires. But with that poor joke out of my way now, happy to welcome you to this conversation, this series of conversations with the fellows from the Bharat Inclusion Research Fellowships. As many of you may know, the Bharat Inclusion Research Fellowship is a part of the Bharat Inclusion Initiative, which is this continuum of work, including research, incubation, acceleration, and investment, all in the realm of financial inclusion, pushing the needle in that direction. The research fellowship, the Bharat Inclusion Research Fellowship, was instituted in 2018 with the objective of going after some of the gaps in our knowledge and our understanding of the Bharat segment, with the goal to unearth, to surface use cases which could be acted upon, which could be actioned by those that are building for Bharat. Over the course, we've supported 12 research studies, and all of these have been across various questions, various themes, all, of course, within this realm of financial inclusion. One the common thread that connects all of these 12 studies is that all of them are asking questions that are, or in fact pursuing questions that are both important and urgent. And I'm quite excited to begin the series of conversations with a study on which is focusing on rules of thumb, in fact, product-specific rules of thumb, how they could lead to information on shrouding and therefore better financial decision making. And before I introduce Renuka, our fellow and who's joining us for this afternoon, a quick word about this being a series of conversations that we will be sort of putting together over the next couple of weeks. It is important, and before we begin this conversation, also want to let everyone know that The series of conversations will have we'll sort of bring in the research fellows to come in to tell us or share with us some of the insights about the people of Bharat, and leave with us some of sort of implications or some of insights that could be acted upon, that could be actioned by founders or by those that are building for Bharat. With that, I welcome Renuka Sane. Renuka is an associate professor at NIPFP, prolific researcher, works in the spaces of public policy, environmental finance, household finance, consumer protection, data protection. She's also quite active as somebody who's trying to help implement policy, and she's a member of several working groups as in her current role. This study, and Renuka, of course, with her two colleagues, Vimal Balasubramaniam and Aditi Dimri from the University of Warwick, were the research fellows who had worked on this study as part of the research fellowship. Renuka, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you for having me here.
Lovely. So we have roughly about 55 minutes or so. What we could do is, if we could divide this into, let's say, three broad parts. The first part, we could delve into the research study, talk about motivations, the process, and so on. A large part of the next part, which is a large part of the conversation, we could get into what are the implications for founders, for the world of practice. And towards the end, if we could also carve out some time for questions, if we get any of them from the audience here. Sound good?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
But yeah, let's begin. First questions first. Tell us about the study. If you could touch upon the motivations, the process, and what did you find?
Sure. So, let me start from the start, really, because this study is actually a culmination of some work that I began around 2010, 11, 12. So several people have been working on issues of consumer protection in finance. So, and I was part of research teams with all of these people, and I would certainly like to mention them before I go any further. So Dr. Sahu, who is now at the IBPI, Susan Thomas at the Finance Research Group, Monica Hallan, who used to be with the Mint, folks at Dwara like Bindu Anand, Vimal's also work on the RBI committee as well. So, all of us started working on questions of consumer protection in finance, financial inclusion around that time. And there were a series of studies that we did then, which kind of indicated that there was just a lot of mis-selling going on in Indian retail financial markets, and consumers were just not able to understand the products that they were buying. And it was also quite evident that this is not an Indian phenomenon. Everywhere around the world, you have had a lot of mis-selling, a lot of fraud in the retail financial space. And this led us to ask the question, how can we improve? How do you solve this problem where a lot of customers are just ending up buying products that are bad for them? Okay. And then what we did was Monica and I did a mystery shopping study where we looked at how bank branches sold some of these retail financial products. And one of the things that stood out is that if, as a consumer, you don't know what to ask, you will never get told what is there in the product. But because you don't know anything about the product, you won't even be able to frame the right questions. And framing of the right questions is extremely important to get information from the financial service providers. So that insight really got us to the study that we've done with Bharat Inclusion, under the Bharat Inclusion Initiative, which is to say, clearly we need to empower consumers to ask the right questions. And in a sense, the question is, can we do financial literacy differently? Can we do it in such a way that consumers become empowered and are able to seek the correct information? So we applied for a grant, we got it, and we did this study. And this study was particularly focused on low income households, but I really feel that the question itself is relevant to people like us as well, because very often when we try and go in and purchase something, we don't even know where to begin, we don't even know what to ask. So if somebody were to give me a list of questions that I must ask before I buy something, that might be useful for people like me as well. So I feel that the study is, while the results at the moment for this particular study are based on our survey with low income consumers, the sense is that the study has relevance for everybody. And what was our hope? So our hope was that, so essentially we designed these rules of thumb, and maybe we can talk about these rules of thumb later, which is essentially the heuristics that consumers should ask before buying a product. And our hope was that consumers will just get it after our intervention, right? So somehow we're able to show them the rules of thumb, and then they just get it in a flash, and then they make the right decisions. Or at least, the second hope was that if this does not happen, at least they will recognize that buying a financial product is a little more complicated than they think it is, and they will seek help from people who perhaps know better. So that was our hope when we started out on this process. And we did our survey, we did our intervention, and finally I think I have three findings specifically from this study, um, which is that rules of thumb work well, sort of. So we found that the group that saw our rules of thumb or our financial education intervention were about 3 percentage points smarter than those that did not. Now I wish that these numbers were higher, but they are not, and it just shows how difficult financial education is. But at least we got some result, we did see some effects. The second finding that we have from this study is that there is a difference between knowledge and action. So you can show someone a particular video, and then you can run a quiz on that person based on the video he or she sees. And it's very possible that on those knowledge questions, these people will do very well. Okay, but after this you show the person a sales video, or you put a salesperson in front of the newly educated customer, and the effect sort of dissipates. So this is really a tough one, right? So it's not just that education matters, but your ability to recall this and recall the questions that you're supposed to ask when there is a very slick sales executive in front of you trying to make a sale is a tough one. And we felt that if we were just measuring knowledge, then our 3 percentage points would probably be 6 percentage points. But you bring in this sales element to it, and the effect sort of dissipates. And the third finding is people really don't like to pay for financial advice. I suppose everybody knows that, and this probably is not a surprise to many people. But I think businesses know it. Business models are therefore designed to make money in another way instead of charging people for financial advice. So I had sort of said that one of our hope was that through this intervention, even if they don't get the answer, they'll realize that they need to seek help to get the answer. But again, I feel that that's much tougher to happen. You're more likely to educate the person than to just get the person to go pay for financial advice. So I think that specifically from this intervention that we did in the field, these would be the top three findings for this particular study.
Wonderful. And I'm now, because I am privy to some inside information, I also know that there was almost a real time improvisation that you did with the intervention. Could you
That's
talk a
right.
little about that?
Yes, so that's what happens when you start on a project, and you have certain ideas about how things will work, and then they don't work as you had hoped that they would. So I'll share with you what our initial dream was. Okay, so the initial dream was that we will build this app, and the app will keep throwing out questions that the consumer has to read and ask. So imagine Supriya is in front of me. Supriya is trying to sell me something. I go on this cool app, and then I say insurance. And then the app prompts me and says, go and ask Supriya what is the price of the insurance, or what is the benefit that I'm going to get, or X and Y and Z. And so what happens is that as the salesperson is trying to sell something to me, I am able to use this app and ask the right questions right at the time of the sale, at the point of sale. So this was what we had hoped we would do, but this didn't work. So we did a lot of pilots before we went live, and those pilots kind of suggested to us that, if we moved in this direction, we are not going to go anywhere, and there were several reasons for it. So one was that most people didn't have a working phone, certainly didn't have a working smartphone. And if you had to have an app that is giving out these questions, then it was difficult, because people, we that particular group was just did not have that many smartphones. I mean, it's not that they had zero, but it was lower than what we had expected. Second were trust issues. So we were these random people landing up and saying, please download this app. And people were like, why should I download this app? Who are you? I don't want strange apps on my phone. And people didn't want to share their information or use their data packets on something that they didn't know was going to be useful yet. So from my data protection hat, I thought that was quite interesting that people were not willing to give out their information so easily. But from the perspective of doing this study, it wasn't very good for us. And the third thing that was more important than both of these was that even in the class of people who had a smartphone and who were not so worried about data issues, they just could not read what was there on the phone. So if I had this one complicated line either in English or in Hindi that they were supposed to read, they just didn't get it. Okay, so it was just too complicated to read a question on the phone and then ask the question to the salesperson. So we quickly realized that we can't do this. Expecting people to read something on the phone is not going to happen, and hence what we need to do is to show them this information in a different manner. And hence we went and made videos, because otherwise it's just impossible to get across this information. So video or audio is really the way to go. At least, I mean, that was our learning on why that app did not work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that bit, because I suppose that has implications for several folks who are building apps which could be consumed in non-English languages, right? I mean, just translation becomes still doesn't sort of take away the complexity of what you want to communicate.
No, and people just don't read. Okay, so yeah, so to expect them to read long sentences, and maybe they read other things, but you see, in this particular instance, it was a complicated ask, right? One, you read this sentence that you have no idea what it is about, you understand the sentence, and then you have the ability to say that to the salesperson in a confident manner. Because if you can't ask the right question in a manner that the question should be asked, then the point is kind of lost. So I think that is a high cognitive ask, and it just didn't work. So it needs to be far simpler, at least for this population, than what we had initially envisaged.
Right, right, right. Makes a lot of sense. So essentially, with this intervention, you were trying to attempt unshrouding. Uh,
Yes.
you in the report you talk a lot about unshrouded market equilibriums. Could you talk a little about that here?
Yes, so basically, our point is was this, that something is shrouded when its attributes are hidden.
Mm.
Okay, so and these kind of attributes are hidden in every market. So whether it's a credit card, or whether it's you're going to a hotel, but in that hotel the phones are going to be charged. Okay, whereas you don't see that when you are paying the bill, or you're not told that what aspect of this hotel is going to be charged and how much is it going to be charged. So these kinds of markets where you are sold products, where the pricing of the product and what you get out of each price is not clearly known, is not clearly stated, are what we call as shrouded markets. And one of the reason why markets remain shrouded is because nobody has an incentive to do unshrouding. So if, for example, I was selling you a shrouded product, and then you came along and you told customers, look, I am now making it transparent for you, Typically in a good world you would expect that I, as the person who's shrouding product attributes, loses market share, and you, as someone who is able to show something so transparently, will then steal away my consumers and competition will solve the problem. But very often in some of these things like finance, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for various reasons. One of them is that either customers don't understand this unshrouding, or second, those that understand unshrouding are able to go and switch, whereas many others aren't, and then the new firm that is doing the unshrouding is not able to make enough money out of that unshrouding. And if it's not going to make enough money out of that unshrouding, then you're stuck in this equilibrium where no firm has the incentive in some ways to do the right thing.
Hmm.
And part of our sense is that, I mean, our reading of the financial market in India is that we are all stuck in this shrouded markets equilibrium where no firm has the incentive to do the right thing, because by doing the right thing it will lose money.
Hmm.
And then how do you move to a market equilibrium where firms feel that doing the right thing will get them benefits?
Hmm.
And maybe if individuals were more financially literate and they were able to see through the shrouding, then perhaps firms would find it worth their while to unshroud these product features, and then we would end up being in an unshrouded market equilibrium. Because that's the point, right? From a consumer protection perspective, that's really the point, that you want to be in a place where um, firms are doing the right thing because it makes sense for them to do the right thing. Because regulation can only go so far. We've tried regulation and it doesn't, it's not as effective. So ultimately you do want some competitive forces to take us to that place, but that's not happening yet.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's what we mean by an unshrouded market equilibrium.
Right. So while I made a note of asking you about the rules of thumb, I'm going to park that for a few minutes. And at this point in time, I want to maybe also ask you to talk about the endowment as a product. Because when you talk about unshrouding, and in your report, you talk about that extensively as endowment being a grossly unsuitable
Yeah.
product. Could you tell us a little about, why do you call it so? Why do
Yeah.
you call it out?
Sure. So basically, I suppose most people on this call may know an endowment product is a product that bundles insurance and savings. So basically, let's say you pay 100 rupees in premium, and in a term insurance product, what would happen is that if I were to die, then my family would get the sum assured or the cover that I have purchased. If I were not to die, then I would just lose the money. Right? It's a clean product, and it's only giving you insurance. Now, an endowment product is giving you both, which is that if I die, my family gets the benefit. But if over the term of the policy I do not die, then I get some returns on the premiums that I have paid. So essentially, it's bundling savings and insurance into one product. Now, why is this problematic? Because typically what is happening is that if you were to buy savings and insurance separately, then the same amount of money would give you a lot more. So for example, with the 5000 rupee cover, the sorry 5000 rupee premium at a particular age, let's say an endowment insurance is giving you cover for 3 lakh or 5 lakh, a term insurance product would give you a cover of about a crore, or those, that's the magnitude of difference. And if you're buying insurance, really what you want is that your family gets a large pot of money to live on after some event has happened that takes the breadwinner away. Similarly, from the savings, right? So let's say if I'm paying 10,000 rupees for an endowment insurance product that gives me a 3 lakh cover and gives me maybe somewhere between 4% or 6% returns, and sometimes the guaranteed returns are lower, they work out to be only 1 or 2%. On the other hand, if I spent 5,000 rupees in buying the term plan and the remainder 5,000 rupees I put in a PPF, then my PPF return is almost 8%. So it's much higher than what I would get from this savings component of the insurance. So in that sense, it's, in our view and whatever calculations that we've done, it's a terrible product, especially for those who are younger, because then the insurance is really cheap. when you go to the market and buy term insurance and you've got a larger pot of money left over, that you can invest in some saving product, even something as simple as PPF. If you invested in mutual funds, perhaps you might get a higher return, but then there is a higher risk. So if you are looking for guaranteed returns, then a long term investment like PPF will probably give you better. And so in that sense, our view is that endowment products are just so unsuitable that it's a puzzle, it's a surprise why anyone buys them. And it's a surprise, well, it's probably not a surprise, firms are making money, so that's why they are there. But it's sad that these products exist and that people get lured into buying them because they think that they should get something at the end of their term. And if I'm putting so much money for premium, should I not get something back? And that's what insurance companies use to try and sell them this product.
Right. And so sort of that expectation from insurance is now also, spilling over to other insurance products as well, where I mean, when a customer is paying premium, she expects that, hey, but what am I getting in return? The
Right.
assurance of, that risk coverage is still not seen as this is what you're getting in return.
Correct. So I think that's part of the problem with how insurance is sold in India. And maybe this is a legacy issue because, in the 1960s, 70s, perhaps there weren't any other savings instruments that you could actually save in. And so the only way to get people to park money long term was to do this mixture of insurance and savings. But in today's market, it just seems like a terrible thing to do with your money. To get both insurance and savings bundled together, when if you unbundle them and bought them separately, you're doing so much better.
Right. But if you look at, like you're saying, right, the current landscape of the of financial products in the country, and even if we were to limit ourselves to products that are available for the Bharat segment, then at least this is my limited understanding, there are very few that may be grossly unsuitable products, but there would be several suboptimal products,
That's right. Yeah.
sort of misfit products that are misfit for the needs of this segment. In a reality like this, how do you apply, almost like a rules of thumb sort of a thinking for financial education? Is that possible?
So I think it's easier to do what we are doing when products are grossly unsuitable. And again, so something like an endowment insurance probably, in our view, is grossly unsuitable to all. But maybe there are other products that are completely unsuitable given your age. So, if you're 60 years old or 70 years old, then you buying insurance just does not make any sense.
Mm,
And so if you one were to develop rules of thumb in terms of separating out what is grossly unsuitable to you,
mm,
perhaps then that effort can also work. Similarly, if how much debt should you take, so if there's a certain ability to repay debt and you want to leverage a little bit, so I'm not saying that debt is bad, but if you want to leverage a little bit, then the question is, can there be a rule of thumb that says that any leverage beyond a particular threshold is just grossly unsuitable to you, given your income flows and your cash flows, or your wealth status. So one could design these rules of thumbs, and the answers to those questions will tell you whether this is something you should totally stay away from, or
mm,
whether it's just suboptimal. And I think this distinction is important because most of us, and me for sure, I know that my portfolio is suboptimal, okay, in some ways, because I'm probably not at the portfolio frontier where I probably making the most that I can. But that sometimes is not such a bad thing, as long as I'm also not in products that are just completely bleeding me.
mm,
Because when you start looking at what is optimal, this becomes more in the realm of financial advice.
mm,
And then you have to start thinking about where you are, what your goals are, what your ability to spend is, etc., etc. And then the answer that comes out may be different.
mm.
But when it's grossly unsuitable, then the heuristics are much simpler to apply, right? Because all you're saying is don't touch this.
Yeah.
You're not saying touch this in a 10% of your portfolio manner and it's okay. So I think that distinction, even in the way we think of financial literacy, is important, where let's at least ensure that our people are not into grossly unsuitable things, and then we can start thinking about more optimization within the portfolio, and then start thinking about what are the heuristics that might work for that.
So net, you're saying that rules of thumb are essentially, they essentially take away the cognitive load
Yes.
on the customer, and that, and at that junction, I should ask you to maybe define for folks that have joined us, what are rules of thumb, and if you could also extend that to in context of startups, what could be some quick and dirty ways to think about rules and rules of thumb, and how do you develop those?
Yeah, so on this particular product, we developed rules of thumbs from really basics of finance theory and our experience in whatever the mistakes that people were making, right? So, what were our rules of thumb? So, we said whenever someone comes to sell you insurance, don't forget to ask these four questions. One is, what is the cover? Right, so that's the question, and the answer, the heuristic or the rules of thumb on which you will compare the answer given to you is that it should be at least 10 times your annual income, right? The second thing we said is ask what the returns are they guaranteed or not guaranteed? Okay, then the third thing was ask what the real returns are, because inflation is important. And the fourth thing we said was ask what the exit clause is. What if you're not able to pay in 3 years? What if you're not able to pay in 5 years? Do you lose all the money? So ask these questions, and then there are certain heuristics or rules of thumb on the basis of which you should compare the answer. So if some insurance is not giving you cover that is at least 10 times your annual income, stop. Right? I mean, it's one of those flow charts that you might make when you're programming, right? If so and so, then just stop. Similarly, in other products, I could envisage making different kinds of rules of thumb. So, for example, uh, in pensions you may have certain rules of thumb on, is this going to stay over 20 years, or is this going to give you what returns, what replacement rate is it going to give you? Or in credit, for example, one rule of thumb could be what is the actual APR, not the interest rate that's being quoted to you, convert it into an APR. Or what happens if the interest rate changes? So is it a floating rate or a fixed rate product? And what happens what are the rules for prepayment? So that's the question you ask, and then you have a rule of thumb saying it should at least be this, it should allow you to do this. So then you have something to compare the answer that the financial service provider is giving you with, right, saying this is in the realm of acceptable, and then we can talk. So I think that for fintechs, really the question is how can you monetize? How can you monetize these kinds of rules of thumbs, right? So, um, and that's a tough question. So, because for fintechs, either you work for the financial service provider, in which case you're providing this as an add-on. So you're providing this so that you lure the customer into your product, and hence the product better be good. If the product is not good, then if you're doing an honest rules of thumb, then it's not going to work. Okay. And the second is you're a standalone product that customers are buying to protect themselves against these financial service providers. So I'm coming to you for help, saying, what is it that I should look for before I buy something? And maybe then the fintech is a standalone company that's really channeling consumers to the right FSP. And I mean, I don't know how to monetize that. If I knew, I would be in the business.
No, absolutely. I think that's a hard problem facing us right now, right? And if we again talk about in the context of the insurance business in the country, and let's say only talking about insurtechs, roughly about 250 odd insurtechs in India, almost half of them in the distribution business.
Right.
Ideally, they are the best sort of platforms for any of such form of customer education, consumer education to take place. But I mean, the dilemma that you raise is quite spot on as to on whose side do you want to sort of side with, and to what extent can you go with respect to customer
Yes,
education.
and the problem is that so far, if consumers are not willing to pay for this advice,
Yeah.
then how do you make enough money to sustain?
Right.
So either, yeah, I mean, and that's the tough one. And I honestly feel like that's the big challenge in front of fintechs on how to quote unquote do the right thing
Mm.
in the distribution space. And so maybe some of this is easier in, let's say, the mutual fund space, because I feel that that market is much cleaner,
Mm.
that there is more transparency in what you are getting, uh, and so you could potentially be a fintech that works with an FSP, where you're not in the, it's easier to do these rules of thumb and then direct the consumer to five funds that may be possible for the consumer. So
Right.
it's much easier in spaces that are cleaner, but I feel that in the insurance space it's a lot harder to do the right thing.
Mhm. Right. So that also makes me wonder, or maybe I think this is also a good junction for us to, call out what are maybe two or three clear implications for, let's say, founders, for startups from your work. Is it possible for us to draw some threads for them that they could act upon?
One is, I suppose, think about, think about what finance theory tells us about rules of thumb, and test and talk to consumers on how they are making the decisions, and what is the effect of this information provision on their decision making. So I think that we understand some of this in the insurance space, but we perhaps don't understand common mistakes that households are making, let's say in the credit space or in the mutual fund space. Or maybe one way to think about this is that in the retail financial space, one of our biggest problem is that households just don't want exposure to anything with even a little bit of risk. Okay, so we always want guaranteed returns, and then we don't want to look at products that may have some market volatility. So what is it that is making us make the same mistakes again and again? And perhaps if there was some clarity on the drivers, maybe it's risk preferences, maybe it's the way we think of time, time horizons. So I don't know whether this is deep preference or whether this is because of experience, or what is it, or is it just a cognitive issue where you're not able to do the maths. So I think that if we were able to find out the common mistakes that consumers made in the various products, that would be a nice way to then design rules of thumb based on what finance theory tells us and the mistakes that you are seeing, because then that leads you to design some products that might channel consumers the right way. And of course, then the second thing is really testing. It's
Mm.
really important to test what your intervention is doing to these consumers, and if you don't do the testing right, then you can't rely on the results that you are getting. So I think two of these, right? And the third thing that I would that's interesting is this whole thing that we failed at, but if there are better ways of doing this, which is personalizing these rules of thumb.
Mm.
So one thing is that there are these standard rules of thumbs that apply for everybody, but then can I build models around rules of thumb for you versus rules of thumb for me, and how do I deliver them at the right time? So
Mm.
like I said earlier, it's not enough to make me see videos when I'm in the mood to see videos, but then when this salesperson comes in front of me, I have forgotten and I don't ask everything that I'm supposed to know. Whereas if there was something real time, that when the sale is happening, I have a reference guide. Okay, so I mean, in the olden days it could have been a piece of paper that you keep referring to, but in today's day and age, can there be something that's user friendly that consumers can use at the time of sale? I think that would be very interesting direction for fintechs to go in some of these product spaces.
Wonderful. That I think those are very solid points for fintechs to carry back with them. We have roughly about 20 questions. I mean, 20 minutes. We have a few questions on the chat. Should we take those up?
Sure, sure.
Um, okay. Harsh is asking whether a subscription model would that work?
I don't know. I mean, in our survey, we specifically asked people whether they would pay for any financial advice, and the answer was like a resounding no. So that is one of our strongest results that nobody wants to pay for financial advice. So, what is it that you will lure them to subscribe for? So, where is it that they see value? And maybe this is something that builds over time, that if you're able to save them from one bad mistake and they begin to see value in it, then they will get into a subscription model, uh, and maybe then it will work. But then in the beginning, how will you get them into the product? So in the beginning, I don't think that people will come into this without proof of concept. So it's again going to be like one of these startups where somebody bankrolls you in the beginning, and then people begin to see value and you begin to get into a subscription model. But there also, rules, I mean, do these rules of thumb change dramatically over the course of life? If they do, then you have a subscription model, right? Because every year I am thinking of doing XYZ and I need this financial information on what to do. But if they don't change that frequently, because for many people, once you've decided on a trajectory, you kind of stay on that trajectory for several years, unless some bad event happens and all your plans come to naught. Right? So, in that case, what is it that you will show them on a subscription model? I think there will have to be something a little bit more than just rules of thumb for getting into financial product.
Right, right. And in fact, with this whole need to share information and the ways in which this Bharat segment is also receiving and processing information, a couple of our startups have also been experimenting with YouTube influencers. I mean,
Right.
earlier it was TikTok influencers, but now they are YouTube influencers, and these are emerging as fairly dependable sources of sending out information which is received and perhaps also acted upon. So while a subscription model, and like you're saying, right, nobody wants to pay for information, but perhaps there is a need to receive information that is dependable, that I could trust, that I could then apply in context. But yeah, I mean, a hard
Yeah,
problem.
so one thing I would say is that in a market that is clean, where the regulation works,
Yeah.
okay, then there can be competition to do some of these things.
Mm,
But in a market where you have commissions of 70 rupees or 40 rupees to be made per 100 rupees of premiums, it's really difficult for a fintech to come in and take that away. Okay. So I think one of the things that really needs to happen, especially in the insurance space, is that some of these regulations have to be cleaned up. I mean, there's a lot more transparency in the mutual fund space today, and then you can play around with some of these things because there's incentive for many fintechs to come and try new things. Whereas in insurance, it's a little harder. So I think that if there is any action, more of it is likely to happen in the mutual fund space, because the market itself is cleaner, and then you can make money by doing some of these things, whereas it's a lot harder in the insurance space. So one of the things that we do need to do is to clean up the regulation.
I am tempted to ask you this, Renuka. Should the regulator be taking a rules of thumb approach to financial education? And in this case, I'm looking at IRDA.
Yes, I think that some of the things that we have put out in the paper are so elementary and so basic that it would be great, instead of the ads that we see from the on buying insurance, these could just be public service ads that are put out to say that these are the basic rules of thumb. So yes, I do see that there is a big role for the regulator in the way we have conceptualized this.
Mhm.
But in the absence, so there are two ways, right? One is that the regulator does nothing, and then you begin to ask questions about how can fintechs do some of this,
Yeah.
and where is it that they can create value for themselves as well. At the end of the day, if they don't make money, they are also not I mean, it's pretty obvious that they are also not going to enter the space. And the other is that if this basic cleanup is done by the regulator, then what are the ways in which fintechs can add value over and beyond this basic rules of thumb that is just done as a public service.
Right.
um, I feel we are in the former situation right now, and till that happens, fintechs have to think about whether there is value for them by going down this line.
Right, right, right. So the institutional voids are way too deep right now for any, I mean, for it to even be remotely seen as an opportunity by a fintech.
Yeah, so I mean, how will you come into this market where there is such entrenched,
Yeah.
players? It's a little difficult unless the regulator gets its act together. And let me give you another example. So in the insurance space, there is something called as persistency, right?
Mm.
Which is because you're buying a product for 15 years, how many years do you stay? Because if you leave within the second, third, fourth year, it means that it's useless, correct? Because you haven't stayed the full term of the product. And even as recently as like last year or year before last, the numbers that I had seen were not very good.
Mm.
So all of these products that are getting sold are not even seeing the full term of the product, which means that it's a lot of money down the drain. And if the regulator were to just act on making these persistency numbers better, you would see some cleanup in the market. But I mean, for whatever reason, we are just not seeing a lot of regulatory action.
That's a good, I think, takeaway for the regulators. I also see another question here, which is on whether you see a need for basic financial literacy in rural India. And I know that you have a point of view on financial
Yeah,
literacy.
I mean, yes, I think there's a need for financial literacy in urban India as well. So if you look at, let's say, Bombay, and you look at all the HNIs in Bombay and the mistakes they make on their financial portfolios, I think that, you'd realize that this is required everywhere. However, the question really is, what is financial literacy? Very often we are used to thinking about financial literacy as being able to add and subtract and being able to understand what compound interest is, or being able to understand what inflation is. And I mean, these are all useful skills to have, but I think over and beyond, I feel we need to expand the definition of what financial literacy is, to something that helps you arrive at the right decisions. So I come back to these rules of thumb, which is, maybe financial literacy should be redefined as enabling you to ask the right questions, because you don't need to know the answers and you don't need to work out the math, right? I mean, we don't work out the engineering in a car,
Mm.
but we ask the right questions in terms of, what is the mileage, does it have airbags, and does it have whatever other add-on features that a car may have. But now we know to ask enough about a car, even if we don't know how to do the engineering ourselves. Similarly, in the financial space, if we even knew how to ask the right questions without really understanding what complicated calculations they're doing at the back, we'd probably be in a better place. Okay, so one example, again, sorry if I may just give you, is we love guaranteed products in India. Okay, but if we were to be able to ask, saying, what is the cost of this guarantee? So I'm getting a guaranteed return, but I'm clearly paying a price for it in terms of the upside that I could have gotten, right? So for this threshold, this 8%, 7%, 6% that you're guaranteeing to me, what is the upside that I'm losing? What is the cost of this guarantee? If I knew how to ask this question, then perhaps someday I'll get an answer which helps me understand or evaluate whether I want this guarantee at all. Especially if I'm 25 and 30 years old, then why do I need a guaranteed return product? Why am I not taking more risk, perhaps? Um, so I think these are the kinds of basic, I mean, I would redefine financial literacy in this manner. I think that it will be more useful to consumers.
But in a way, to me, it seems like so the guarantee that you're talking about is really the outcome, or the outcome that I'm looking at as a consumer. What do I do to arrive at that outcome is that behavior. So, I mean, do I buy the endowment product, or do I buy optimal or suboptimal
No,
products?
so I think I was thinking it in terms of, when I'm choosing a product, right? I mean, the two things that I care about is what am I paying for it and what am I getting in return.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know that I'm getting a guaranteed return, right? and no matter what happens, I'll get my 3%, 4%, 5%. You
Right.
pick a number. But what am I paying for it?
Sure. Sure.
Okay, and I think that trade-off is absolutely not clear to many people. People think that guaranteed returns are for free, but they are not for free. Similarly, there are small things like that in several products, where if you only asked it in a manner in which you are likely to get answers to these questions, maybe you think differently about some of these products. So what you ask becomes extremely important, and perhaps we need to teach people what to ask.
Right, right, right. And that's where roots of thumb sort of are quick tools uh,
Yes,
to ask those questions.
yes, yes, yes.
Fantastic. And I see that some Srinath is also seeking your financial advice. He's asking, what is your opinion on NPS?
Oh,
Uh,
I mean, look, I worked on the NPS in the early 2000s. So, I've been associated with it ever since before it started. So, yeah, I love the NPS, at least conceptually. So, I think it's a clean product, and it's a very low cost product. The NPS architecture is fantastic in terms of how it unbundles pension fund management from the record keeping agency from distribution. So I think two things that NPS did in the early 2000s, one was this unbundling architecture, and second, so the fund managers were not allowed to distribute the products in those days. Now some of these regulations have changed, but by separating the distribution from the fund management, we kept a lid on the fees, including auctions for PFMs. And the second thing we did again, which has now changed a little bit, is that we said just passive management.
mm,
Because it's pensions money, we just want you to replicate the index. And I think that was something that was profound, but it has been diluted to some extent today.
okay.
But at least, I mean, it's in terms of its architecture, it's way ahead than many other products. The problem is that, again, in a market that is bad, the good product will always find it difficult to compete. So, if I'm making 40, 50 rupees by selling an endowment product and making 10 rupees by selling an NPS, everyone is going to gravitate towards selling the bad product. And sadly, then the discussions are we should increase fees on NPS. I wish the discussions were that we should reduce the the fees on insurance, but that's not how the world works.
Right. This has been great, Renuka. I hope that we've answered all audience questions. Yes, I see we've answered all of them. I, for one, definitely enjoyed this talk, and even when I've seen the report, and Savita, we'll share a copy, a link of the report here. Ghazal, if you could share the link on the chat for anyone who wants to access the report. But coming back, Renuka, this was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Left several ideas open. I'm hoping the fintechs who've joined us today would also find things to pick up and take back and perhaps experiment with in their own spaces. That said,
All
uh,
right.
let's
Well,
keep.
thank you, Supriya, for having me here and for funding the study. We wouldn't be here but for your support. And I'd be very happy to hear from fintechs if they find something in this that they can actually implement, or if from this something else comes out, because very often things morph into what you don't decide at the start. And so I'd be very curious to know if some people are doing things related to financial literacy or distribution in this space. And finally, if we are happy to work with fintechs if they want to use some of the videos that we have made, or work with them to design new rules of thumb and test if they work in other product markets. So open to those kinds of discussions and collaborations. So feel free to reach out to me.
Wonderful. Folks who've joined us, you could either write to Renuka directly, or you could write to Bharat Inclusion Initiative, and we'll make the connections. All with the intention of taking this work to greater heights, wider across the world. That's it from us. Ghazal, the floor is back yours.
Thank you, Supriya. Thank you, Renuka. Thank you for taking out time and thank you for such a lovely session. I'm sure the insights and the findings are going to be helpful to the entire audience who have participated today. I've already shared the report link on the chat. You can click on it and just download the report. Before we end this, I would just like to talk about our initiative called Bharat Inclusion Initiative, which is an initiative by CICO. With this, so Bharat Inclusion Initiative supports startups that are developing meaningful solutions for the low and middle income customers in the area of financial services, skill development, livelihood, and healthcare. One of the programs under BI is Office Hours, which is a 45 to 60-minute long virtual online mentoring session with experts from within a team and our extended network. All advisors, all the advisors are provided on a pro bono basis based on the specific request and details provided by the startup. Startups can share their challenges at a given point of time. Depending on it, we identify the right mentor and conduct a 45 minutes to 60 minutes of office hours. Renuka, thank you for being one of the mentor for office hours. In case anyone wants to have a detailed discussion, kindly apply for the office hours. I'm also going to share the link of the same. Um, I'll also drop an email for that. So in case you missed it right now, you can apply it later as well. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you all. And bye bye. See ya.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thank you, everyone. And yes, the session is getting recorded. We'll be sharing the link in case you want to go through it again. Thank you.